Chapter 12. I had horrible dreams that night that lasted years. Not true nightmares, really. Not at first. But very odd, in a macabre, intriguing sort of way. There were many disordered figures lodged and packed into a room that was at the same time a geographic. They and I stumbled around with staccato gaits, first winsome, then fierce, getting faster and faster until the whole thing resembled some sort of spastic frenzy. By then, I knew it was a dream, but that didn't help. It was a commentary on me, the daytime me, the message seemed to be. It was about the recent me, the lately irrational, emotion-taught me. Other me's too, I suppose, but in any case, too damn many me's. It would only get worse. I would stretch to the frenzy. I would warp. So I woke up, fast as I could. Cortez was sitting beside my bed. He smiled when I opened my eyes, the lids of which felt puffy, ponderous. It seemed I had been out 2 days with a raging fever. The muscular spasms had stopped hours before, now even. The local bug, in other words, had struck. "Welcome to Sanction," said Cortez with a wide grin, adding, "Didn't you feel it coming on?" I ignored him. I hadn't, of course, but God knows I should have. Idiot. It took me 8 days, a full local week, to get over it. Mostly, I slept. Peacefully for the most part. I did meet a couple of doctors, or maybe just one, as the only things I remember about either of them were youth, athletic postures, and greatly affected, pretend deep bedside voices. Lia came often, cheerfully unconcerned for my welfare. "Everybody gets it," she reported gleefully. Holly came twice, ever friendly, but vague about progress with the armor. Cortez left only once, when Karen came. She hated being there, hated looking at me as I was. She was gone in minutes, again replaced by Cortez, who entered looking like the gossip I supposed he was. I ignored him, rolling over into my pillow for my hourly nap. I drifted off, wondering if I had not, in fact, learned more about her in those few anxious moments than in all of our previous hours. I thought I knew at last what she wanted from me. It was nice to be able to just sleep instead. I was sitting up, smoking a cigarette on the morning of the 8th day when Lia came in and told me about the picnic. I didn't answer at first. I was still trying to get used to her appearance. I hadn't seen her in the past couple of days. She looked rotten. There were dark circles under her usually china-pure eyes. She was somewhat pale as well, and her movements seemed a bit shaky, hesitant, and uncoordinated. Worry. And only one thing could make that one worry. I was anxious to ask her about him, but I couldn't seem to get through her, "Let's be cheerful, if it kills us, him." It was all for her sake, of course, though I doubted she was aware of it, and to be sure, I got all the fussing over. Lia had a great time directing the expedition to the out-of-doors, insisting that I be carried out on a spring sheet by 2 attendants, one quite short, one quite tall, and laughing delightedly at the bouncing their mismatched gait gave me. It was, thankfully, a short trek. Just 300 or so meters along the riverbank to a grove of very earth-like trees. If it had been much farther, I'd have gotten out of the Springer and walked. I was still pretty weak, but I figured anything to be better than that bouncing seesaw. It was a beautiful warm day. Bright sun and blue skies. The rain's now long gone. It was a nice spot, too, beside a rancher's grazing, stretching down from the low hill all the way to the edge of clear, sparkling water. Damn, but it looked a lot like home. I was still looking for a chance to ask about Holly, remembering that it had been quite a while since we had spoken, but before I got an opening, There was the milling about, spreading ground cloths and unpacking utensils and getting me propped. The attendants left then, only to be replaced by Cortez, face glistening with sunscreen. He was helped by Karen, of all people, with the carrying of the food and liquor. She smiled pleasantly at me, said hello and the rest. She even went to the trouble to feel my forehead, a more token gesture than could be believed. Then she picked a spot a couple of trees away, cuddling up with a glass of wine and a shaded book screen, and looking, well, perfect. Others from the project wandered by, snatching bites of chicken and sips of wine, a long procession which was apparently planned, since there were ample stores for the long afternoon. At one point, there were a good 36 people gathered around us, chattering, gossiping, giggling. I was left pretty much alone, either in deference to my health or my notoriety, or most probably both. Just the same, I missed nothing, however juicy or dull. Laya, sitting beside me, was the favorite of all. Everyone stopped to chat with her. She charmed each of them individually and thoroughly and made it look easy. She seemed to know everyone by name, for one thing, which was damned impressive, particularly since most of those in attendance were crew, rather than the scientist type she was usually around. Occasionally I would break off from admiring the performance of Laya's social flair to check on Karen, infinitely more beautiful than anyone else, and growing more so as the afternoon sun blazed multicolored in her hair. She was nevertheless left alone. It may have been her position that discouraged approaches. She was boss to most of those people, after all. Or, for all I knew, she had the reputation of a loner, or a bore, or even a bitch. But I didn't think so. It was her beauty. Curled up on the grass, reading, a glass of wine in her hand, she was more painting than real. Her face, in classic profile, was unusually calm and serene, and framed with casual perfection by a few golden strands which had slipped free from the luscious hair flowing across her shoulders and halfway down her back. She was wearing a spotlessly white crew jumpsuit. It provided the fundamental thread linking the necessary contrasts of blue sky eyes, blonde hair, skin, green grass trees. The view was a painting. Angel descended among mortals. I was, frankly, grateful to be there at that instant. For all those who were not, however well or long they had known her or would, had missed it. I could not imagine she would ever, in her strident life, manage to repeat that breathtaking image. It was her beauty that kept them away. It was intimidating. No woman could stand the comparison that side-by-side conversation would inevitably illuminate. And the men. How does one approach and disturb the angel in repose, even should he wish to crack the crystal? Look, touch not. And everyone, to be sure, looked. The gathering about Laya stirred constantly with the oft-repeated turning of heads. The women snatched, or rather sneaked, glances, brief, probing, envious. Some of the men followed suit, not wishing to be obvious, but many didn't care. They simply arranged themselves so that she was in easy view, and thereafter rattled conversationally along with people they never saw. I leaned against my pillowed throne and did some serious staring of my own. Unmistakably Karen, but still so unlike her. It was her. It just wasn't her life. If you could see this from my eyes, I wondered at her. The admiring hosts, the idyllic setting. If you could see as I see you now, would it help? Would it reinforce your faith? Would it revive sinking dreams and hope? Or do you hate the beauty that has helped make your life just so? I never could decide. No way to tell, of course, but I'd expect some of each. It would have cheered her, even thrilled her, to have seen herself then. It would have had to. It was simply too lovely. But afterwards, with time and doubt leaning so heavily on the memory and with that placidly desperate struggle of her versus her, and some hate did exist, I felt certain, for the beauty, for the brand of having it. I shook my head, shook it again. I found that I was no longer even looking at her. Hadn't been in a while. The sun was no longer framing, and she had moved position a little. Christ, I thought. Has it come to this now? Too much wine and bug-eating drugs and afternoon sun and... Guilt was still about it, too, still leading me away from the point. I shook my head a third time. Most of the party had wandered off. 2 hours or so of sunlight remained. It was still pleasantly warm. Laya was encouraging, gently, the departure of her final moth, a stoutly muscular Asian woman seeking inside influence for a transfer back to her old position in the Project Dome galley. "The Acrotechs know nothing about food," she complained in a shrill whine that had been installed, no doubt by mistake, in that massive chest. "They hate everything I fix." From the way she strove to suppress a giggle, Laya was hardly surprised at this piece of news. Clearly she found both the issue and the woman hilarious, but somehow she maintained her composure until, at last free of the cook, sending her marching robot-like down the bank, short, thick arms held firmly immobile at her sides. Laya collapsed into helpless laughter before the cook had gone 20 meters. She jammed her peals of laughter against the corner of one of my pillows to muffle the noise. It was a compassionate gesture, and more than a little comical in itself. When she had resumed some semblance of control, she turned to me. I beat her to it. "Let me guess," I said. "You're the one who had her moved out of the dome in the first place." She looked surprised, but nodded. A pixie's grin curled up. "Worst cook in the world," she said, and then the laughter bubbled out again. "She cooks like she looks," she added, before collapsing once more into hysterics, now unmuffled and bell-like. Laya laughed so long and so hard she cried. I found that I was laughing as well after a few seconds, so joyous was the sound. Cortez, asleep for hours, broke off his gentle snoring abruptly. He sat up, rubbed his eyes. "What's so funny?" he asked sleepily. Then, without waiting for an answer to that question, a wise move since it had only started Laya off again, Cortez asked another. "Anything left to eat? I'm starved." He followed this by immediately rummaging through the stores, opening and closing food seals. Still half asleep, he was spilling everything. I lifted my leg to avoid a stream of some sort of purple fruit juice. Laya, now relatively calmed, sighed, half smiling at his childlike grogginess. I groaned audibly, having little of her tolerance and even less of her tact. After some 4 hours of garden party gobbling, I had yet to have my private moment with Laya, and I refused to cater to this sloppy sleepyhead on top of that. "Cortez," I said as calmly as I could, "there's no food. No more wine either. Why don't you run fetch some?" He frowned, scratched his head. "No, I'd have to go all the way down to storage. I don't know why." I cleared my throat. Let me rephrase that. "Cortez, you will run and fetch the wine. Dig?" "Huh?" "Understand?" I quickly amended. He stared at me, at Laya, who was suppressing yet another giggle, and nodded. Yeah," he said. "I'll be right back." "Take your time," I added quickly. "Don't run." Laya smiled at his retreating form. She sat up, stretching her arms over her head and yawning. She looked around. "Is that about everyone?" she asked. I pointed to Karen, still absorbed in her reading. "Must be some story," I offered. She do that a lot? Laya shrugged. I've no idea. She replied coolly, thus establishing, for my future reference, her lack of any connection with the other woman. I see, I replied, no less editorially. But Laya didn't bite. The subject had already been dropped. Fine with me. I was plenty ready to get on with something else. Now, I began, what's wrong with Holly? She sobered visibly, her shoulders stiffening. Is it the suit experiment? The look of concern on her face managed to both age her and compliment her at the same time. It reminded me of her depth and her value. Jack, he doesn't know what he's doing, she blurted. Pretty bright chap, you know, I countered easily. He's an expert at this sort of thing. Nonsense, she replied firmly. No one's an expert at this. This is theory, Jack, and new theory at that. It's never even been thought about seriously before, much less attempted. You've tried to get him to stop, have you? She glanced at me briefly, then away. She nodded. And he wouldn't budge, would he? She met my eyes. I smiled. Only on this, I added. She smiled reluctantly in return. How did you know that? I shrugged. Well, I knew you ran the rest of it. She made a face, looking embarrassed, and of course, damned proud. I sighed and leaned back against the pillows. I fished a cigarette out and took my time about lighting it. She watched and waited. Finally, I'll try it if you want, Laya. I'll talk to him. Would you? She asked, just as if she was really surprised at the offer. Of course I will. Only, I wouldn't count on much. But he thinks a lot of your opinion, Jack, she assured me. I blew a smoke ring. Funny. If I were as smart as him, I'd never give me a thought. She smiled broadly, placating. Well, Holly is that smart, and he listens to you. You know he does. I nodded. I do, but I don't know why. He doesn't know anything about me. Of course he does. I shook my head. Jack Crow stories don't count. We're talking about me. She tilted her head to one side, as though she couldn't believe her ears, but her voice remained amused. Well now, what happened to the smooth talker? Is this a confession or what? Well, I've been sick, I replied pitifully, and we both laughed. Okay, I said at last. I'll go see him before we eat. He's been working at it all this time? She nodded. Ever since the night you got sick, he's worked on nothing else. He doesn't even go over the departmental reports. You know, Laya, I offered, that's a really good sign. Probably means he's discovered something. Or thinks he has, she retorted bitterly. I laughed. Where's your composure all of a sudden? She was not amused. Where is his, Jack? What's the hurry? I shrugged. He's on the scent. She shook her head, stared at the grass. Too fast. Too fast for us, maybe, but too fast for anyone, Jack. I don't care who it is. I took her shoulders in my hands and turned her toward me. I looked into her eyes. Who it is, Laya, I said firmly, is Hollis Ware, a genuine genius, an upper mind. Unhand that woman, you drunk! We spun around together to find the real drunk, the scream-singing fisherman Lewis, standing in the grass a few steps away from the water's edge, holding a fishing pole in one hand and the inevitable jug of Syntho in the other. He was soaking wet. Laya and I looked at him, then at each other, and burst into laughter. All the tension was forgotten with the sight of that idiot standing there dripping water. And the hat he wore! I couldn't imagine where he had gotten it. I wondered idly if it was made of real straw. He ignored our laughter, stomping up to us in a shower of droplets and peering down with mock theatrical disapproval. "While the cat's away, huh?" he accused. I noticed I still had my hands on Lia's shoulders. I dropped them quickly. "Too late, Crow," he snarled, pointing a finger. "I've already seen enough. You!" he yelled at Lia, making her jump. "You scarlet woman, you!" Lia tried to look penitent, but couldn't keep a straight face. Lewis shook his head in disgust. "That's it. Laugh, you hussy. And you!" I jumped on cue. "You know what Hollyware's gonna do to you when I tell him what I've seen?" No, sir," I replied meekly. "He's gonna take you into some corner somewhere and—" He broke off, thought a moment, "and think you to a bloody pulp." He straightened up, tilting his hat back on his head. He noticed Karen. "Now, what have you done? My God, this girl has died reading." I followed his gaze, saw that Karen had fallen asleep in front of her little screen. Something landed on my lap. I looked down. A wet fishing pole. Lewis plopped to the ground behind it. He eyed me narrowly. He was very drunk. "Didn't catch fish one," he reported miserably. "Fell in the river to boot." "Maybe you're not drinking enough," I suggested blandly. "Yeah, like you." "Me? I protest that." I held up my glass of wine. "What do you call this?" Lewis snorted, unconvinced. "A smokescreen is what I call it. Or propaganda. Nope, just make that prop. That, Mr. Crow, is a stage prop. I'd take a phony beard more seriously." I sighed. "Okay, I give. Get to your point, oh great fisherman without fish." He took a deep breath and, taking great care to pronounce each word clearly, said, "Point is, Crow, that you're not, among the many things you're not, a serious drinker. You are a pretender." He broke off, relaxing, and nudged Lia with his shoulder. "Did you notice how well I enunciated that?" "Lovely," replied Lia gravely. He seemed delighted. "You really think so?" "Absolutely, Lewis." He smiled broadly. "Want to hear it again?" That reminded me. "Lewis, you are Lewis, aren't you?" "Course I am. What'd you think?" "I mean, you're the same Lewis that runs this place?" He shrugged. "Nobody runs this place that I know of." He paused, took a sip from his jug. "I do, however, own this rock. Have for a long time." He turned again to Lia. "Raised it from a pup. Boulder to you. Yep." He continued, patting the turf fondly beside his leg. "Boulder first, then he became, bigger?" Lia offered. "Right." He nodded. He eyed her with scrutiny. "Hey, you know an awful lot about this sort of thing for a hussy. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. Boulder, then a bigger boulder. All easy so far. But next comes the toughie, when he got to be an asteroid." He shook his head. "Ugly, ugly stage in life, let me tell you, is that adolescent asteroid period. No respect at all, no values." "But with a will of iron," broke in Lia, "and the determination of a god." Lewis looked delighted. "Golly, that's pretty. Oh, yeah, with iron will and the determination of a god, He paused, right index finger poised. "I did it." Lia clapped her hands. "Hooray! At last." "The suspense was wrecking me," I remarked. Smart-ass, sneered Lewis without rancor. Smart-ass pretender drinker. I turned to Laya. Do I feel a challenge in the air? She smiled. Could be. Take your hands off my air, growled Lewis, and accept, damn it. What do I get when I win? He frowned. That's if you win, I believe. Whatever. What do I get? Lewis reached for my cigarettes, lit one. Why, the fish, of course. What the hell else? I shook my head as if to clear it. I think I'm having a relapse. No excuse. Then what have fish got to do with... We are talking about a drinking contest, aren't we? We are when you can keep up. Then what have fish got to do with that? He exhaled a long stream of smoke. Everything, dummy. That's how you tell who won. How? We don't just drink, Crow, he said impatiently. We drink and fish. At the same time? Laya asked. Hell yes. Drink till you catch one. You've been doing that without Jack, Laya pointed out. True, Lewis admitted, but not fish drinking. That was celebration drinking. What were you celebrating? She asked. My last fish. How long ago was that? He sneered at her. Hussy. He stood up abruptly, swaying. He seemed confused. What's wrong? Asked Laya, concerned. He scratched his head. Can't remember what I was about to do a bit ago. How many guesses? I asked. Lewis shook his head. No, really. Challenge Jack? Offered Laya. Did that. Tell about raising the planet, I suggested. Did that. Laya winked at me. How about stagger around dripping water? Doing that, said he and I in unison, and the three of us laughed. Lewis cut short his laughter ahead of us with, Ah! What? Prompted Laya. He grinned, pointed in the direction of Karen. I'm gonna see what led this girl to the grave. And he stepped awkwardly over me toward her. I turned to Laya, getting to my feet. About ready to go in? She nodded. I started to gather up the mess around us. Her hand on my arm stopped me. I looked at her and saw that the tightness had returned to her features. I was amazed at how temporary an effect all the laughter had had on her capacity to worry. I squatted down beside her. Jack, she began. I cut her off. Laya, would you stop fretting? But you will talk to him. I said I would, and I will. Relax. Holly's a big boy. But Jack, she said, her eyes pleading, he's taking such a terrible risk. I sighed, patted her arm. Well, he hasn't taken it yet. But he had. We heard Cortez's screams a second after that. He was bounding toward us across the meadow, slipping and sliding, falling once, waving his arms. We rushed to meet him. Through his panting and hysteria, we managed to get out that Holly had been discovered, lying unconscious on the laboratory floor, babbling incoherently. He was clutching some sort of plastic skull cap or something with all sorts of tubes and wires running out of it. Nobody had been able to pry his fingers loose from it. A seizure, the doctors had said. Catatonic. Laya was already running back to the dome before hearing all that Cortez had to spout. Karen, now wide awake, sprinted athletically after her. I gave it up after about 100 meters. Damn bug still had a piece of me. I had to slow up, to wait for Sanction to stop spinning. Lewis appeared beside me, looking benignly helpful. Here you go, Jack, he said, and offered a shoulder. He was a good crutch, in considerably better shape than most drunks I had seen. But even with his help, It seemed to take forever to cross the field, enter the dome, and work our way down into the lab. All the time, the thought kept streaking through my mind that Holly, with his genius fried, would now be nothing more than the timid lad he had at first seemed to be. As we stepped through the seal, I heard Holly's voice. He was sitting up on the workbench, surrounded by nervous faces. I broke loose from Lewis and rushed ahead to see him. Hot damn. It was alive, anyway. "No, really, he was saying to them. "I'm fine. A little weak, but—" He noticed my stumbling approach. "I'm okay, Jack." He assured me with a smile that contained equal parts of shyness and pride. I was still worried. "I can see that. You look great, but—" How to put the next question? He anticipated me. "It's still me, Jack." He turned to Laya, putting a weary arm around her shoulders. "Really, it's still me. I'm fine. Just a little tired." The doctor was reading a gauge off of a medigrip attached to Holly's other arm. "You're considerably more tired than that, Doctor. You're near physical exhaustion." He pulled Holly's eyelids up with a thumb and scanned the pupil underneath. "And emotionally drained as well, I'd say." Holly nodded vaguely. "Well, maybe he began, before pitching forward into Laya's arms, out cold. The doctor was quickly reassuring. "He's all right," he said to Laya. She looked about to faint herself. "Are you sure?" The doctor nodded, gestured toward his gauges. "I'm sure, and just worn out, like I said. He'll be all right with plenty of rest and care." "He'll get that," asserted Cortez importantly. "I'll see to it." Laya smiled at him. "Thank you, Cortez. That's very sweet of you. Why don't you start right now?" She nodded at Holly's still form, still crumpled between her and the tabletop. Cortez stepped to her side, and the bunch of them managed him into a prone position. Laya stepped back. "Thank you, everybody," she said to us, "for showing such—" She froze at the sight of something over my shoulder. We all turned around. Lewis was still standing at the entrance of the seal. His face was hard as stone, his muscles drummed tight. He was staring at the black scout suit which had been propped into a sitting position in a chair beside the workbench, wires and tubes streaming outward. Laya took a step toward Lewis. "Lewis, are you all right?" He turned slowly at the sound of her voice. He raised a trembling arm and pointed at the suit. "What is that?" "That's a scout suit, Lewis. Holly's been using—" That's war shit!" he shouted, livid with rage. "What's it doing here?" "But, Lewis," protested Laya meekly, clearly unnerved by the incredible transformation of personality. "You knew this was a fleet proj—" "I knew you were in fleet! I didn't know you were fleet, god damn it!" He turned and stared at us, fury and disgust rippling his features into a fist. Then he walked out. Nobody moved for several seconds. Then came the collective sighs, and all was activity again. Laya hovered over Holly, mumbling rapid-fire questions the doctor gamely answered. Karen strode to the intercom and ordered a Springer team to the lab and intensive hookups for Holly's sleeping quarters. Cortez and a group of techs began clearing a path through the electronics for the Springers to better reach the bench. I sat down heavily in a chair and lit a cigarette and pondered. I took the opportunity moments later to add my superfluous assurances to those Laya had already heard while Holly was being loaded. Then I managed to evade questions put to me by the curious and morbid, stopping by out of rumor. When Holly and most of the rest had gone, I stayed and talked briefly with the doctor, learning nothing new. Then, when he was gone, I helped the techs guess what should and should not be keyed off in the lab during Holly's absence. When they left, I was alone. And so, with Holly safe in his bed and surrounded by professional concern and layman's good intentions, I found the chance to betray him. In all the confusion, I was sure to have several minutes alone with the security systems. It was a rotten act to take advantage of him that way, but perhaps no worse than the act of sabotage itself, which took a surprisingly short time. A half hour later, only I knew how helpless Holly really was. More still, she was waiting in my suite when I got back, flushed still with the excitement and the running and the point of being there. How dare you leave me in there the other night? She began, clutching my arm furiously. Mad, guilty, upset too much, I clamped my fist around her upper arm to jerk her away. Clamped too hard, and she moaned with the sudden pain, and our eyes met, and her lips parted, and I knew what our point really was, as I had known for some time. This was it. Strength on her. The clamping fist, anger and muscles together. Brute from me. And she screamed when I threw her down and was upon her, ripping at the spotlessly white crew jumpsuit, and she struggled and kicked, but writhed too. She surged into it. Maybe I did too. But both of us fell toward it, scratching and clutching, and it got very, very rough. Perfectly awful. Awfully perfect. And then laid flat out, pinned and twisting, blood seeping from her nose and a shiner coming on and screaming at me, begging me to make her beg and please, oh, please, yes, yes! Tell her over and over what she really was. She loved to hear me tell her what she really was. And I did. But damned if I really knew. Either of us. It was spectacular and all-encompassing, and it racked through me, shocking, stunning bolts of pleasure and pain. Both of us beating on her, abusing her, degrading the angel's exquisite form, and yes, the angel herself, and, of course, whatever was left of both of us, and always so damn rich with rippling ecstasy. So damn good somehow. So damn rich. So horrible. Eventually, mercifully, we slept in the nick of time.